I think it's really important for us to talk about these narratives that are so dangerous. Just like I don't know how many of you saw in Ontario, there got a little bit of coverage. Someone asked the Premier Doug Ford about people living with disabilities and why they're not getting the help, the $100. And did you he started talking about fraud again, like people taking advantage. Like, it was so unfortunate that's what gets the airplay, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I remember it's just a lot of it seems like it's what do you call it, gaslighting a little bit. Like the way the government frames it, it's like they say it's not our fault that you're living in poverty. They kind of make excuses about, well, like, if you only budgeted better or something like that, and then they don't make any mention of the fact that it's actually legislated poverty. And so it comes across as a little bit like gaslighting, like, if you only tried a little bit harder, you wouldn't be in poverty, kind of thing.
Yeah, I agree. It definitely is. And that's what was so disappointing, I think, with this survey about this disability inclusion action plan. And it starts off with a question like, why does Canada need a disability inclusion action plan? Like, as if they're starting from the beginning. And and then just using really, like, not using strong language, using really neutral language, like, for instance, saying Canadians with disabilities have been disproportionately affected by the health, social, and economic impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. So we crossed out disproportionately affected and put ignored. They've been ignored during the pandemic. The pandemic has exposed long-standing inequalities. That's that's our words. Their words were, the pandemic has worsened the long-standing inequalities. Like, just really tamping down the language so that it's as if, so anyone reading it that doesn't have that firsthand knowledge of what their life experience is, what they're going through, they read it and think, oh, the government's doing good.
And it's a myth, really, because in so many inequalities across the country, a lot of people that, it's ableism, really. I mean, I'll call it what it is, right? And a lot of people think that, people with disabilities in Canada are well taken care of, that their shelter rates are taken care of, that they're on top of their actual rates, that the rates that are provided are all support, and that their shelter is above it. No, that's a myth, because the fact is, as we all know, that it's not. And a lot of accessibility equipment is above that cost. Medical is above that cost. And it's, I think it's just been kind of shadowed that way, that people they think that that's kind of how people with disabilities are taken care of in Canada. And they're not, Riley. And that has to change so greatly.
Exactly.
I don't know if you remember, Brent, but remember when Shane Simpson was involved in the accessibility legislation?
Yes.
And again, I mean, I consider him a good advocate. I mean, even when he was the minister. But one of the problems I had with that legislation, I mean, I took part in those public consult. I went to see him when he was in Surrey here. But part of the problem with the package they sent out is the questions that were provided in the package. Like, it encouraged us to give our feedback, but the way the questions were framed it didn't allow for questions like to be critical of the dollar amounts and shelter. There was no questions on shelter or dollar amounts or anything like that. And so the questions that were asked it was very cherry picked. You know what I mean? So even though they were asking for feedback, it was a very sanitized feedback in a sense, right? Because they were avoiding some of the questions.
Yeah.
So that was one of the big problems I had with it. Even though, like I said, I mean, I admire the work that Shane Simpson did, but that was one of the negative things I came away with. Is that, like, you couldn't help but notice that it was a very sanitized. It was like, they're asking for feedback, but it was very sanitized and very, where you're kind of forcing a certain kind of response because you're not asking certain questions.
Collective question.
They're leading you. It's like you're being led to tell them what they want to do. And not about real bold action, which is what we want. And the thing is, when you try and assert that, and you're grateful to have the opportunity for the voice, I think it's something, Brent, you had talked about last week, this issue of like, you don't want to burn bridges. You don't want to be too adversarial or confrontational, but you're trying to challenge, like you have to do more. More is possible and more can be done, but that's the problem, that people, that you're taken as being like, you're not a team player, or you're being argumentative, or you're being confrontational, instead of taking it like, well, this is the work that's already been done. Why are you not taking off from that? Why are you starting over and using weak language and not acknowledging work that's already been done and building on that?
Absolutely, because like the fundamental pieces are already there. The main platform is already there. Like I was mentioning before, is there's so many programs that are already in place. All they have to do is bridge those programs all together and build from that point on, rather than start from scratch and and then do like a 3-year study to determine, well, what is already in place. And that's the part I keep trying to wrap my head around, is like, well, why do you need a study? Because it didn't take a study to run out CERB and other resources to people that need it.
That's what I find really helpful with advocates like yourselves and people that are speaking up, like even on using social media and calling it out and talking about it, like people that have shared, a lot of people don't know. People don't realize, like, okay, if you are a person living with a disability and you did get work and you made so much money, it gets clawed back. So many people didn't know that. It's very, very important that we just keep sharing information, keep sharing and getting more and more mainstream people to understand and know what the real issue is, because that's the other problem. It's not just like within government that they have to stay within their own messaging, but so often they're limited in their language. They're not as ambitious as we want them to be, even in the language, like we talked about with that survey. And it's just up to us. Like, it's important that we're the ones that keep shedding more and more light on it, so that it does become common knowledge that expectation will have to be met, will have to be answered.
And it's so important that that to continue advocacy work, and it's holding the information and putting it out there so people see, like people hear it. They hear.
That's the only way you can hold any government into account, is by making the clear picture known so that they have to answer to it. That's all we can do. Those of us that don't get burned out, I know you guys know a lot of people too, they just, it is very exhausting. A lot of families are just in survival mode, and they don't have the energy for added advocacy.
I've been fighting the same clawback to my survivor's pension for almost 9 years now. And, you know, how many, it's been like, what, 50 emails at least in 9 years? It gets exhausting, and I keep repeating the same thing. And every email that I send, I get more and more targeted, and I think I get more and more better at making my point. But it's basically the same point over 9 years. And the only thing that I've gotten better at, because I think initially, you know, you get just really emotional and angry, right? and I've gotten better at, you know, tempering my anger. Tempering my anger and just getting to the point and just being factual without getting my emotions into it.
Yeah, I know it's so hard. All we can do is keep pressing and pointing out the inequality and the injustice, you know.
And that's what I find, Cheryl, is like what Neil mentioned also, it's the way of wording things. Like I've typed out letters, the same thing, and I find to fine tune it rather than taking out anger or like real frustration. Like people say, well, why don't you use action words? Saying, no, you have to do this and you have to. Well, no, because if you start using action words and you start throwing it at the government and saying, you know why, you know, like different language that I don't find really appropriate. I mean, under different circumstances of a different scenario, maybe it will be. But if you want to have respect in dialogue with them, of making an awareness of saying, okay, like these rates are frozen for X amount of years. This is what the repercussion is people are having to go through. Of more like lived experiences, rather than saying, why haven't you done this, and like why do you refuse to do this? You know, you're causing people to die. And you know, I've seen a lot of these tweets, and then not that I don't agree with some of the, you know, maybe the frustration of the wording, but I find maybe sometimes it's ineffective of the dialogue on how it comes across, right? You know, and like, I mean, there's no right or wrong way, I guess, on how people may word things, and I'm not, you know, gonna tell people how to word things at all. No, definitely not. But at the same time, it's I find for myself different approaches, and it seems to work quite well. And people say, "Wow, I didn't know that." Someone says, "Oh yeah, but you didn't say about the word made," you know, and I'm thinking, I don't want to go there on that, because it upsets me.
Yeah,
because
it's very you're right. It's
very triggering
for a lot of people.
And that's why I don't even touch it. I mean, I know about the legislation, and I know I had one advocate. He says, "Why are you in favor of that?" And I'm not going to follow you now. And I'm like, okay, well, don't follow me then. I mean, I don't agree with. I agree that if a person is, you know, if they're really suffering really bad, then fine, then that is the option that they can do. But if they wanted to pass the legislation also, so that, oh, because a person is suffering financially, well, then now you have the option. Well, that's the part that really was triggering for me. It's like, well, why? Like, why are you not abiding by the CRPD? So you want to, you know, pass a law that states, well, you're suffering. Okay, well, here's an option for you.